Thank you very much. That was War Suite. A friend of mine arranged that. I went to University of North Texas, and at North Texas we did a lot of this kind of music. It's the first time I'd ever encountered this kind of percussion ensemble music. And Gino Vanelli is a well-known, in the 70s anyway, a well-known jazz fusion vocalist who combined classical and jazz elements, and he actually had an operatic voice which he would use for this style of music, and this was one of his pieces from the mid-70s, I'd say, and worked very well, I thought, for a percussion ensemble, so we played that to start off the concert, and had that opening Rachmaninoff type of piano intro, so actively combining classical and jazz and rock elements, which was a very, big part of what was happening in the 70s. If you know much about rock and roll at that time, rock and roll was grabbing at all kinds of things and bringing it in to the rock and roll palette, classical music. So you had, ELP and groups like that bringing in classical, and then you had jazz rock was also born. So he was doing all of that himself at that time. This next piece we're going to do is 20 Minutes Off the Pavement is a piece that was written by David Friedman and performed by him. In fact, again, at University of North Texas, we premiered the piece with David Friedman. It was 20 years ago, I hate to say that, but it was 86, I believe. We went and performed at the Percussive Arts Society International Convention in Los Angeles, Anaheim, and California, and premiered the piece with him. It's a really great piece. He's well known as a jazz vibraphone player, so obviously the vibraphone is the solo instrument. He was a part of a duo, or a mallet duo called Double Image. If you really like this kind of music, you should really go check out some albums by Double Image. Look on Amazon or anywhere, actually. Fantastic mallet duo, David Friedman and David Samuels. David Samuels is a little bit more famous in America. He was the keyboard player for Spyro Gyra for all those years. And then he started a group called Caribbean Jazz Project, who was here a few years ago. They have since had a reunion, and I just saw them in Austin earlier this month. This piece is 20 Minutes Off the Pavement is really interesting in that it combines a lot of different, you'll hear the piece goes through a lot of different, sections. And beginning is very, mysterious, I guess would be the best way to describe it, and dissonant at times, using all kinds of unusual, mallet techniques such as dead strokes on the bars that gives it a different feel. The rhythmical concepts of this piece are really neat too. Him being a jazz player, is very fascinated with rhythm. So he used a lot of neat rhythmical complex patterns that fit together. And then you'll hear the piece go through a variety of different textures and feels, from a dissonant, mysterious effect to a very relaxed melody, beautiful melody, and it ends with another beautiful melody at the end. David Friedman, actually, I saw him in Austin and asked him about the piece, told him we were doing it. He said he'd never actually heard it performed with a group, so I might send him a recording of this so he can hear what it sounds like. And to feature, of course, you have to have a soloist, and we're going to feature Cody Hollow, senior percussion performance major on the vibraphone. So this will feature, again, Cody Hollow. Let's, I guess we're all ready? Okay. My job, of course, is to stall and give you a little bit of background information. So here we are with David Friedman's 20 Minutes Off the Pavement. the problems with percussion concerts always is the moving of equipment. We try to plan it and to be as least amount as possible, but I guess if we did everything on the same instrumentation, it would probably get boring though. So we vowed not to do that tonight for sure. And so this next piece is a real different piece. Lion is a piece that was written and performed by a group called Kodo out of Japan. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Japanese taiko drumming. It's really exciting, high energy drumming. The drums are all handmade. The largest center taiko drum is gigantic, bigger than that bass drum. And the guy stands sideways and plays like this. They play with really large wood sticks, basically. A lot of physical training goes into being a taiko drummer. In fact, I think the Kodo group lives together on an island. And they do nothing but Kodo and then train other people how to do it. And there's a long tradition of how they make the drums and everything. Anyway, what I decided to do is take the piece Lion, which actually was, you may recognize it from an old Budweiser commercial, believe it or not. It's one of those Super Bowl commercials. I think it was where the ants were carrying the little Budweiser bottle along, and then they tip it up and dump it down into their ant hole. If you've ever seen that one, that was the soundtrack, was this piece. So I decided to use a little different tact. Instead of that, we're going to combine taiko drumming with Blue Man Group, if you've ever seen the Blue Man Group. Kind of a little bit of theater combined with the taiko drumming. So I don't want to give it too much away, but I'm trying to stall so they can get ready to come on. So a little bit of theater, a little bit of dance, some neat drumming, and it's kind of a visual feast, I guess. Instead of just the listening, we're going to add some visual elements to it as well. So when I guess they're about ready, and I will head over there and we'll get started. So here is Lion. All right, so that's a little different. And now for something completely different. As you, I'm sure probably quite a few Grizz fans out there. Yeah? Well, we have quite a few up here too. And these guys are going to perform for you next. Are there every Saturday at every game. And the drum line of the UN Marching Band spins. The drum line, of which I'm the proud instructor, spends probably more time than anybody else in the band. They rehearse an average of 45 minutes extra every day. So they meet at like 3:30, the rest of the band comes at 4:15 every rehearsal day. And then every Saturday they're here at 7:30 in the morning, usually practice an hour and then get out in the field and practice with the band. So there's a lot of time that goes into being the drum line, and there's a lot of pride as a result of all that work that they put, goes into it. So it's I think appropriate to show off what they've been doing, what they work on, and the challenge, of course, is to take something that's designed for outdoor music and bring it inside. Part of the problem is when you're outdoors, you have a 140-piece band, and your drum line here and the trumpets may be way about 30 yards away. So one of those problems, of course, is staying together there. In here, we have a different problem. We have to provide melody for the group, we have what's called our pit, like an orchestra pit. The pit ensemble in front is going to mount keyboards in front, are going to play the melodic stuff, while the drum line will be up on stage and we do a little drill for you. So the challenge is hearing each other in this situation too. It's a completely different playing situation. They have to play a little softer so they can hear each other. So, we ready back there? Drum line, are we ready? Yes, they're ready. Ready? You ready? So we're going to start off with our cadence called double beat, which you hear at games, and you get a more close-up view of it, followed by Ron Con Con, which was a piece made famous by Tito Puente, timbale player and band leader, and it'll feature the tenor players, which are kind of like timbales in the marching drum line. And then we'll march off into intermission, and then the second half will be steel band, Islanders steel band. And while I have a chance to say something about that, in the program, I don't know if you noticed, but we have completed our second CD, finally. Islanders CD, second CD is about ready to be released. We didn't have them, we were struggling to get them ready for tonight, but they're not quite ready. They will be ready for Christmas. In fact, they'll be ready probably middle of next week. So if you're interested in ordering one of those, you can order one tonight at the intermission or after the concert. The CD is entitled Pandemonium. Pandemonium referring to the steel pan. And it has 12 tunes. 12 tunes on it, and please check it out. I encourage you to get that. It'd be a great Christmas gift if you haven't started on that, if you're still working on that. I'm sure I haven't started. But. So here is the UN drum line playing double beat, followed by Ron Con Con. Sam Smith, the last two bass drums here, who are in the marching band drum line, and are not in the percussion ensemble, to come in and play on that this evening. Of course, one of the problems, of course, is rehearsing another piece besides what they're already doing in marching band. We squeezed in rehearsals where we could. So we're going to do we did a little switcheroo, and now we're ready for Ron Con Con. Thank you very much also for coming out on such a freezing cold evening. Try to warm you up a little bit with some island music this evening. Also wanted to, again, what you were just listening to, the CD you were just listening to is actually our new CD. So you got a taste of what it sounds like. I think it sounds pretty good. And I want to thank Rick Kushel, who's recording the concert for us tonight. He and I have been working on that, and he's done a great job helping mix that album, and we're about ready to get it out there to you next week. So, first piece here we're going to play is Bee's Melody is a panorama tune from Trinidad, where the instruments come from. One of the most famous steel band composers, Lord Kitchener. This is Bee's Melody. down a little bit. Well, not slow things down, but just change the feel a little bit. Andy Narell wrote this piece, Light in Your Eyes, quite a while ago. And Andy Narell's hails from New York City, but growing up in New York City, he heard all these steel band players from Trinidad. You hear all kinds of music in New York City, of course. And he was fascinated by the instruments and has become probably the leading jazz steel drum player in the world. Many albums out there. And this is one of his pieces he did, I don't know, quite a while ago, about maybe 20 years ago, possibly. Great piece, Light in Your Eyes. know where the title came from, but it's a reggae tune. Actually, I don't think it was originally written as a reggae, but that's what it ended up being. Cliff Alexis, who wrote the tune, actually built some of these pans up here, steel drums. Let's see, the two black leads here, Evan and Sam are staying behind two instruments he made. And I think these seconds, he may have made these double seconds. But the pans, just since I'm on that topic, the four center ones are called single tenors or leads. The two outside front ones are called double seconds because it's two pans and one player. Triple guitar, Alex is on the triple guitar, and the triple cello is Matt back there. And then we have the sixth bass here, Eric's playing. These are just some of the sizes. They also make like 9 bass. They make rocket basses, which are suspended in the air. They make quads, which are like 2 sets of double seconds, one hanging in the air over the other one. So a lot of different instruments, but these are the standard instruments. And so anyway, Confusion is a reggae tune, so here is Confusion Reggae. again for coming out tonight. Another subtle reminder, buy a CD. Yeah. Anyway, so if they're out, there's order forms out there, and we'll, if you pay for it tonight, we'll send it to you without charging you postage. How about that? Otherwise, you can get an order form and send it in whenever you like. So anyway, this is our last tune, Parlos Bomberos, another Tito Puente tour de force. It was like one of his signature tunes featuring himself on timbales. In this case, we're going to open it up a little bit. It'll feature Cody Hollow on congas and Eric Rockel on timbales. Here is Parlos Bomberos. Thank you again so much for coming out. Anyway, on with the music. Thank you again so much for coming, and stay warm. Until next time.